Hi, my name is Amanda Hayes, and I am going to do a birth book review for you. During my childbirth education certification, I had to select 3 books that I was going to read as a part of the requirement. One of the books I selected was Joyous Childbirth Changes the World by Dr. Tadashi Yoshimura. He is a Japanese obstetrician who has had a maternity clinic that he inherited from his father when he was 28 years old for about 50 years. And during that time, he has attended approximately 20,000 births. His cesarean rate, even while accepting high-risk pregnancies in his maternity clinic, is only 3.2%. His forceps delivery within the past 3 years is 0%, and his vacuum extraction rate is only 0.5%. Statistics are remarkable, and he really has some interesting things to say. It is translated from Japanese into English, and in the translator note, there is a sort of disclaimer that talks about how there are some politically incorrect terminologies that Dr. Yoshimura will use. He does talk about God and gods a lot and the forces of nature and true womanhood and how a woman can only become a true woman and a true mother through a natural vaginal delivery. That can be pretty controversial, and it can kind of rub you the wrong way. So in that, even though this book was only 155 pages long, it did take a little while for me to read because I had to take it in small doses. He talks about how true childbirth transforms a woman into the essence of woman and mother. And true childbirth with medicated, no intervention, not cesarean, vaginal birth, a physiological birth is the only way that a mom can become a true mom. Through cesarean birth, a mother can become biologically a mother, but cannot become a mentally or culturally a mother. Now, I am not very well versed on Japanese culture, so correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that is not necessarily true. And this is his opinion, but there are instances when a mother is in need of those interventions, and that can be due to serious complications or the fact that has been sexually abused and the sensation of pushing is just too reminiscent of a past assault. And so in order to comfortably give birth and to peacefully give birth, the epidural is needed. And I'm saying that very, very carefully because I do believe that interventions are used far too much, far too frequently in the United States. That's something to think about when you're reading his material. I do think a mother who has a child by cesarean is just as much of a true mother as a mother who has a child by vaginal birth, and just as much as a true mother who adopts a child. I don't really agree with him on this. It might have something to do with the Japanese culture, so if you do know something about that, please let me know. And there might be some things lost in translation as well. I want to be careful about how critical I am about his standpoint. At the same time, I do want to develop my views as I'm reading this. So another thing that he talks about is the medical model of childbirth being artificial childbirth. And I really thought that was an interesting term. On the one end, we have physiological birth, which includes no intervention from medication, no induction, no episiotomy, epidural, and the fetal ejection reflex and all of the natural hormones that facilitate childbirth and oxytocin and all of those prostaglandin, all of those things. Considering it on the other end, where we have all of the interventions that are routinely done, calling that artificial childbirth, I think that is an appropriate term, and I really liked that. I had never heard it before in all of the podcasts that I've listened to and books that I've read, and so I really appreciated that. It's my deaf dog. Literally, my deaf dog. And so another thing that they don't do at the Yoshimura Maternity Clinic, coached pushing. And that is different from what I experienced in the birthing centers here where I gave birth to my 2 sons. I even had some coached pushing. I kind of didn't know what to do, and I had not ever heard of just allowing your body to push prior to having my 2 sons. So that is called the fetal ejection reflex, and he talks about the involuntary uterine contractions, abdominal muscle contractions that help to push the baby out without any coach pushing. I did have some tearing with my first son, and I feel I listened to what other people were telling me and not so much what my body was telling me, which was to slow down. I had very fast labors. My second labor, I did not have tearing, and I attribute that to just listening to my body and being in the water while giving birth. So natural childbirth requires no deliberate pushing. Now, he also believes that natural childbirth requires no guidebook. And in this day and age, I do not agree with that. Women have been sort of programmed in the last generations to believe that they are suffering from an illness during pregnancy, and that childbirth is a medical emergency, and that interventions are necessary in order to successfully give birth. Many women, unless their mothers have experienced the midwifery model of care, are not aware of the fact that they have everything within them in most circumstances to naturally and safely have a physiological birth. There does need to be a guidebook and education to women in this day and age in the United States in order to help facilitate a natural birth. The most important thing to me is that women have received all of the education that they need, and when they do make decisions surrounding their birth, they are informed and they make those decisions without being led to believe that they have to make those decisions. And that's in a hospital birth, that's in a birth center birth, and that's also in a home birth. Natural childbirth is no longer the norm in the United States. When he talked about data, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, he has a very small section in it. You kind of have to dig for it. There isn't like a very organized index where you can look at all of his stats, but again, the cesarean rate at his maternity clinic is 3.2% in the past 3 years. And in the rest of Japan, he cites it being 20 to 25%. Now, in the United States, the cesarean rate is upwards of 33%, higher in some places. So that is a remarkable achievement that he does have within his clinic. And the advice that he gives to pregnant women, which I do think is very valuable advice, is 3 things: no vegging out, no pigging out, and no freaking out. So first thing is no pigging out. Don't eat unhealthy, and he believes eat as naturally as possible, organically, and to follow those guidelines. That's the problem with the obstetrical care, is that most obstetricians are not trained in nutrition, so when they see a woman in the prenatal visits, there isn't much talk about nutrition for pregnancy. And that's where we see gestational diabetes. And no vegging out. Don't lay around. He has the old house that's to the maternity clinic in Japan, where it is a Japanese-style traditional home from the Edo period, where women can chop firewood, lug up water from a well, squat down and clean the floor, and use a wood stove to cook, and they can get in touch with their ancestry and how they were during pregnancy, how much work they did during pregnancy, and do the physical labor that Dr. Yoshimura believes is essential for bearing children successfully and for giving birth successfully. He believes that hard physical exercise is necessary to have a successful childbirth. 3 hours a day of walking, 100 squats per day, that is the recommendation that he gives. And no freaking out. Trust your body. He even says that you need to be prepared to die during childbirth. And that also might be something that's cultural, and I don't know, but be prepared to die and accept whatever happens. If the child dies during childbirth, Dr. Yoshimura believes that that is a part of God's plan and that they are meant to pass away. That medical technology should not intervene, and those who are destined to die will die. That's his phrase. And that's a little bit scary when you're thinking about childbirth. You want to think about death during childbirth, but he emphasizes that it's important to just accept whatever fate may happen. I don't know that if you're pregnant, you want to read this book, but at the same time, it is kind of just having peace with everything surrounding your birth. Now, I do think that there are instances for medical emergency, and he even states himself in one part of the book that he does intervene if there is medical emergency, but at the end of the book and talks a lot about the return to agrarian society. He cites the Amish as being a model for that, and how they are selfless and how they do trust themselves. And if you do know about the Amish, they do have home birth, and there's an interesting history behind that community as well. He believes that there should be no work for pregnant women and mothers, that it inhibits and is a hindrance to femininity and motherhood and to womanhood, and it's going to be hard to kind of accept that if you're reading it, and and accept that you can't be a career woman and be a mother at the same time, because you will become masculine. Or if you are working, it'll be harder to conceive because you are becoming masculine. And that could be something to do with his upbringing, and I am not fully familiar with the Japanese culture, so please, if you have any information, or if you are Japanese and you do know about the Japanese culture and womanhood, go ahead and just put a little bit of input here, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. One thing that is sort of interesting at the end of the book, he talks about childbirth as being sort of a religion, and midwives as being priestesses, and all the spiritual connectedness that comes with childbirth. I do believe that there is a spiritual part of childbirth, but I'm actually pretty hesitant to think of midwives as sort of priestesses, unless it's all just a big metaphor and it's not literal. I was very touched by one story in this book, and it's called The Baby Born with No Brain, and I don't want to ruin that for you, but he accepts all high risk to his clinic, and there are certain instances when the mother knows that the child is not going to live very long after birth, and full abnormalities. He facilitates the woman when she has been advised by obstetricians to get an abortion, or they don't want to accept her to have a natural childbirth because of the circumstances. Dr. Yoshimura welcomes those women into his clinic, and he facilitates a place where mom can bond with baby as long as baby is living after childbirth. And I think that is a really beautiful thing. He really believes that the fate of children is in God's hands, and that it is an interesting book, and it's going to kind of push your limits a little bit, and it's not very long. There were times where I had to put it down because I was like, oh brother, you can't be a true woman. You don't give birth vaginally. And there was a woman who was a detective who came in, and she had a very rigid masculine face, and her first birth was a cesarean, and then after her second child born naturally vaginally at his clinic, how she was so feminine and he barely recognized her. So I do think that there is some truth to the fact that childbirth does add a different dimension to your femininity and your womanhood, and it changed me completely, and it changed everything that I thought I knew about womanhood and myself. But I don't think everybody's story needs to be the same, and so I think that as a man, maybe it's difficult for him to understand that, but at the same time, he has been at 20,000 births, and he is with women every single day, watching them give birth, and so he witnesses this miracle, and there has to be some truth to what he's saying. So that is my review. If you want to comment, that'd be great. The book is called Joyous Childbirth Changes the World by Dr. Tadashi Yoshimura, and there is a link to his clinic. It is in Japanese, but you can see some pictures of the old house and of his clinic on that website, and I'll link it for you. And that is what I'm done talking about that, and hopefully I can get back with you and review some different books that I have read. The Essential Home Birth Guide by CPM's Jane Drickta and Jodalyn Owen, and I also have read The Birth Partner by Penny Simkin, and Anime's Guide to Childbirth, Anime Gaskin, and I'm also reading Birthing from Within by England and Horowitz. So those books, as I read them, I'll kind of do little reviews for you, but this is the first one, and let me know what you think, and I will put a link to my GoFundMe. I am trying to do some midwifery assistance training next November, and I would love to go, and I have a GoFundMe page that has a video on it, and I also have the video here on my page, so if you want to go ahead and follow those links and support me, that would be fantastic. Thank you!